The fluorescent lights of Oakwood Elementary's cafeteria buzzed overhead like angry wasps, casting harsh shadows across the rows of folding chairs where parents sat with crossed arms and pursed lips. The air hung thick with the scent of disinfectant and lingering traces of that day's fish sticks. But underneath it all was something else. Tension so palpable you could almost taste its metallic bite on your tongue. Preparing and narrating this type of story takes a lot of time and effort. If you like the story, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. If you want to watch every story of our channel, turn on the bell icon. Joseph Stewart stood at the back of the room, his calloused hands gripping the metal doorframe as he watched his 8-year-old daughter Emma approach the makeshift podium. His work boots, still dusty from the construction site, seemed to anchor him to the linoleum floor as whispers rippled through the crowd like wind through wheat. He could feel their eyes on him, some curious, others judgmental, all of them waiting. Emma's small hand clutched a wrinkled piece of notebook paper, the kind with the perforated edges that still clung to bits of spiral binding. Her dark hair, braided that morning with more love than skill, had begun to fray at the edges, and her school uniform, a navy polo and khaki skirt that Joseph had carefully ironed the night before, showed the evidence of a full day of playground adventures. A grass stain on her knee told the story of recess soccer, while a small tear in her sleeve spoke of helping a friend retrieve a ball from the thorny bushes by the fence. The PTA meeting had been routine until now. Budget discussions, fundraiser announcements, the usual complaints about parking during pickup. But then came the moment that would change everything, the announcement that children who wanted to share something about their families during this special family appreciation night could come forward to speak. Emma had raised her hand before Joseph could even process what was happening. Her teacher, Mrs. Peterson, had smiled and nodded, clearly expecting one of the typical presentations they'd heard before. Stories about family vacations to Disney World, or Daddy's important job at the law firm, or Mommy's volunteer work at the country club. Joseph's stomach twisted as he remembered the conversations he'd overheard in recent weeks. The parking lot whispers when he arrived to pick up Emma, usually 15 minutes later than the other parents, because he'd had to shower off the day's concrete dust and paint stains. The subtle comments at parent-teacher conferences about Emma's lunch account balance, or the fact that she wore the same 3 outfits in rotation, each one carefully maintained, but clearly not from the boutique stores where other parents shopped. There was Mrs. Richmond, perfectly coiffed and perpetually disapproving, who served as PTA president and never missed an opportunity to mention her husband's dental practice or their recent kitchen renovation. She sat in the front row now, her manicured nails drumming against her designer purse as she checked her Apple Watch, the gold one that probably cost more than Joseph made in a month. Beside her sat the Hendersons, whose matching Land Rovers were always parked in the prime spots during school events. Mrs. Henderson taught piano lessons to half the kids in Emma's class, while her husband ran some sort of investment firm downtown. They lived in Maple Heights, the neighborhood with the gates and the perfectly manicured lawns, where Joseph sometimes worked construction jobs and tried not to think about the life his daughter would never have. Then there was Dr. Martinez, whose son Carlos was in Emma's class and whose medical practice had its name on the scoreboard at the high school football field. She sat with the quiet confidence of someone who'd never worried about whether the electricity would be turned off, never had to choose between buying groceries and filling up the gas tank. These were the people who made the decisions at Oakwood Elementary. They organized the fundraisers with their $100 per family suggested donations, planned the elaborate class parties with themes that required costumes and supplies Joseph couldn't afford, and somehow always managed to make him feel like an outsider looking in through glass he could never break. Joseph worked for Morrison Construction, the same company where he'd started as a day laborer 12 years ago when Emma was still in diapers. He'd worked his way up to crew supervisor, but it was still back-breaking work that left him exhausted and aching each night. His hands bore the scars of 1,000 small cuts and burns. His back protested every morning when he rolled out of bed, and his work clothes, carefully segregated from Emma's school things, carried the permanent smell of sawdust and sweat. Their apartment was clean but modest, a two-bedroom unit in the Riverside complex where the walls were thin and the neighbors sometimes played their music too loud. Emma's room was painted a cheerful yellow. Joseph had done it himself, working late into the night after she'd fallen asleep, making sure every brush stroke was perfect. Her bed was a twin mattress on a frame he'd built from scratch, painted white with purple accents because those were her favorite colors. The bookshelf in the corner held a collection of library books and the few new ones he could afford to buy for special occasions. Each one read and reread until the covers showed the wear of loving use. The kitchen table where Emma did her homework each night bore the rings of countless glasses and the scratches of school projects. But it was sturdy and served its purpose. Joseph had found it at a garage sale 3 years ago and spent a weekend sanding and refinishing it, teaching Emma about the satisfaction of making something worn and discarded beautiful again. Now, as Emma stood at the podium adjusting the microphone with the serious concentration of a seasoned public speaker, Joseph felt the familiar knot of anxiety in his chest. What would she say? What stories would she share about their life together? Would the other parents hear about the nights when dinner was scrambled eggs and toast, or the times when he'd had to explain why they couldn't go to the expensive birthday parties at the trampoline park? The room fell silent, except for the persistent buzz of the fluorescent lights and the distant hum of traffic on Maple Street. Parents shifted in their seats, some leaning forward with genuine interest, others checking their phones or glancing at their watches. Mrs. Richmond's expression was neutral, but watchful, like a hawk scanning for prey. Emma cleared her throat, the sound amplified by the microphone and echoing off the cinder-block walls painted in the school colors of blue and gold. She looked out at the sea of adult faces, then found her father's eyes at the back of the room. The smile she gave him was radiant and uncomplicated, full of the pure love that children possess before the world teaches them to measure affection in dollars and cents. "Hi, everyone," she began, her voice steady despite her small stature. "My name is Emma Stewart, and I want to tell you about my daddy." Joseph's breath caught in his throat. This was it, the moment when his daughter would either inadvertently reveal all the ways their life fell short of the Oakwood elementary standard, or somehow find a way to speak their truth without shame. Either way, he knew that after tonight nothing would be quite the same. The paper in Emma's hand rustled as she unfolded it, her careful cursive writing visible even from Joseph's position at the back of the room. She'd written her speech in purple ink, her favorite color, and had decorated the margins with small hearts and stars. The same hands that had drawn those decorations had also helped him count out exact change at the grocery store, had sorted coupons by expiration date, and had never once complained when he'd explained why they couldn't afford the name-brand cereal or the fancy sneakers with lights. What would she say about the man who read her 3 stories every night even when his eyes burned with exhaustion? About the father who had never missed a school play or parent-teacher conference, even when it meant losing pay he desperately needed. About the daddy who had taught her to find joy in simple things, picnics made from peanut butter sandwiches in the park, movie nights with library DVDs and homemade popcorn, Saturday morning pancakes shaped like animals, while music played from his old radio in the kitchen. The silence stretched like a held breath, pregnant with possibility and fear. At the back of the room, Joseph Stewart waited to discover what his daughter truly thought about the life they'd built together, and whether the love that filled every corner of their modest world would be enough to withstand the judgment of those who measured worth in ways he'd never be able to match. Joseph Stewart's alarm clock screamed at 5:30 a.m. every weekday morning, its red digital numbers casting an angry glow across the bedroom wall. But he rarely needed it. His body had learned to wake naturally at 5:25, giving him those 5 precious minutes to ease into consciousness before the demands of the day crashed over him like a wave. The apartment was still dark as he padded to the kitchen in his worn cotton boxers and an old T-shirt from Morrison Constructions Company picnic 3 years ago. The coffee maker, a $15 special from the discount store, gurgled to life as he started his morning routine. 2 scoops of the generic brand coffee, enough water for exactly 3 cups. 1 for now, 1 for his thermos, and 1 extra because sometimes the day demanded it. While the coffee brewed, he would check his phone for any texts from his foreman about the day's assignment. Construction work was unpredictable. Weather delays, permit issues, supply chain problems, any of which could mean a shortened workday and a smaller paycheck. He'd learned to budget conservatively, always assuming the worst-case scenario. Because hope was a luxury he couldn't afford when Emma needed new school shoes or the rent was due. By 6 a.m., Emma would stumble into the kitchen, her hair a beautiful disaster of tangles and cowlicks that spoke of deep, peaceful sleep. She was not a morning person. That trait came from her mother, along with her stubborn streak and her laugh that started in her toes and bubbled up through her whole body. Joseph would have coffee waiting in her favorite mug, the one shaped like a cat that he'd bought her last Christmas. But hers was mostly milk, with just enough coffee to make her feel grown up. "Morning, sunshine," he'd say, and she'd grumble her response while climbing into his lap. Still warm with sleep, and smelling like the strawberry shampoo he splurged on because it made her happy. These were the moments that sustained him through the longest days, when her small body would curl against his chest, and they'd share comfortable silence while the world slowly woke up around them. Breakfast was usually simple, but crafted with intention. Scrambled eggs with cheese, the real kind, not the processed singles, because he'd read that growing children needed real nutrition. Toast made from the bread he baked himself on Sunday afternoons, a skill he'd learned from YouTube videos, watched late at night after Emma went to bed. Sometimes there would be fruit, whatever was on sale at the grocery store, carefully portioned to last the week. Getting Emma ready for school was a dance they'd perfected over 3 years. He would braid her hair, a skill that had taken him months to master, with countless YouTube tutorials and practice sessions on her patient dolls. She would choose her outfit from the 3 school-appropriate combinations they'd laid out on Sunday evenings, each one clean and carefully maintained. The navy polo, with the small stain near the bottom hem that he'd almost managed to fade with spot treatment. The khaki skirt that was getting a bit short but would have to last until the end of the school year. The cardigan that had been a gift from his co-worker Miguel's wife, hand-knitted in Emma's favorite shade of purple. Joseph had tried to teach Emma to iron her own clothes, but she was still 8, and the iron was heavy and potentially dangerous. So he did it himself each Sunday night, setting up the board in the living room while she watched cartoons, pressing each piece with the care of someone who understood that appearance mattered in ways that weren't always fair, but were always real. The drive to school was 8 minutes if the traffic lights cooperated. 12 if they didn't. Emma would chatter about her dreams from the night before, or remind him about upcoming school events, or simply sing along to the radio. Joseph's truck was 15 years old and had 180,000 miles on it. But the radio worked, and the heat came on when they needed it. And Emma had long ago claimed the passenger seat as her throne. During the school day, Joseph would lose himself in the rhythm of physical work. Framing walls, laying concrete, installing drywall, tasks that required his full attention and left little room for worry about things he couldn't control. His crew respected him because he worked harder than anyone else and never asked them to do anything he wouldn't do himself. Miguel, who had 3 daughters of his own, would sometimes slip Joseph extra granola bars or pieces of fruit, claiming his wife had packed too much lunch again. It was charity offered with such grace that it felt like friendship. At lunchtime, Joseph would often find himself thinking about Emma. Was she eating the lunch he'd packed? The sandwich made with the good deli meat, not the processed stuff, because he wanted her to have protein that would sustain her through the afternoon. The apple slices with a tiny container of peanut butter for dipping, a trick he'd learned from a parenting blog. The homemade cookies when he could afford the ingredients, or the granola bar when he couldn't. He wondered if she sat alone at lunch, or if the other children included her in their conversations. Did they notice that her lunchbox was plain blue instead of featuring the latest cartoon character? Did they ask why she never brought the expensive snack packs or the juice boxes with the foil caps? Emma never complained, but Joseph had learned to read between the lines of her cheerful reports about school. Pickup time at 3:15 was always a relief and a source of anxiety. Relief because it meant another successful day of providing for his daughter, of keeping her safe and fed and loved. Anxiety because of the other parents, the mothers in their yoga clothes and expensive SUVs, talking about tennis lessons and vacation plans. The fathers in business casual, checking their phones while they waited, clearly annoyed at having to leave work early for pickup duty. Joseph would park his dusty construction truck between their pristine vehicles and try to ignore the looks. His work clothes were clean, but clearly marked by his profession. Boots that had seen 1,000 job sites. Jeans with permanent stains from concrete and paint. T-shirts that bore the logos of construction companies and tool manufacturers. Emma would bound out of the school building like a golden retriever, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders as she ran to him. Her face would light up when she saw him, as if he were the most wonderful surprise in the world, even though he'd been there at exactly the same time every day for 3 years. She would launch herself into his arms with complete trust that he would catch her, and he always did. "How was your day, princess?" he'd ask. And she would launch into detailed accounts of recess games and math problems and which book Mrs. Peterson had read during story time. She spoke with the breathless enthusiasm of someone who found the world endlessly fascinating. And Joseph would listen to every word while other parents conducted their pickups with distracted efficiency. Sometimes Emma would mention play dates or birthday parties, and Joseph's heart would tighten. The play dates usually happened at houses in Maple Heights, where the mothers would serve organic snacks and the children would swim in backyard pools or play with toys that cost more than Joseph's weekly grocery budget. He couldn't reciprocate by having children over to their apartment, couldn't offer the kind of entertainment that these families expected. The birthday parties were worse because they often had admission fees disguised as venues. Chuck E. Cheese, trampoline parks, pottery painting studios. $25 per child was a fortune when you had to choose between that and gas money. But he found ways to make it work, because Emma's social life mattered more than his pride. Evenings were sacred time in the Stewart household. Homework happened at the kitchen table with Joseph's patient guidance, his own high school education stretched to its limits as he helped with increasingly complex assignments. When Emma struggled with math, he would find educational videos online and watch them after she went to bed, teaching himself so he could teach her. Dinner was always a production, not because the food was fancy, but because Joseph believed that mealtime should be an event. He would light the single candle they kept in the center of the table, and they would talk about their days while they ate. Emma would tell him about her friends and her teachers, and he would share carefully edited versions of his workday, the satisfaction of completing a difficult task, the joke Miguel had told, the beautiful sunset they'd watched from the roof of the building they were working on. After dinner came the homework check. The bath with bubbles made from dish soap because it was cheaper than the real stuff. And then the highlight of every day, story time. 3 books every night, without exception. Sometimes they were library books, sometimes old favorites read for the 100th time. Sometimes stories he would make up on the spot about a little girl who could talk to animals or fly to the moon. Emma would fall asleep with her head on his shoulder while he read, her breathing gradually slowing until he could tell she was truly at peace. He would carry her to her room, tuck her into the bed he'd built with his own hands, and kiss her forehead while whispering the same words every night. "Sweet dreams, beautiful girl." Daddy loves you more than all the stars in the sky. Only then would Joseph allow himself to collapse. In the living room, with the TV turned low so he wouldn't wake Emma, he would review their finances on his phone, checking account balance, bills due, upcoming expenses for school events, or Emma's growing feet that seemed to outgrow shoes every few months. He would make grocery lists that balanced nutrition with economy, plan home improvement projects using skills learned from YouTube and supplies bought with contractor discounts, and worry about all the things he couldn't control. Some nights, when the weight of responsibility felt too heavy, he would look at the photo on his phone from Emma's last school concert. She stood in the back row of the second-grade chorus, wearing the white shirt and black pants he'd bought specifically for the event, her face glowing with pride as she sang songs about friendship and dreams. In the background, he could see other parents taking professional quality photos with expensive cameras, while his was just a blurry phone snapshot. But Emma's joy was crystal clear, and that made it perfect. These were the contradictions that defined Joseph Stewart's life. He was a man who could build a house from foundation to roof, but sometimes struggled to help his daughter with her math homework. He could lift 100-pound bags of concrete all day, but felt his knees shake when he had to interact with the other parents at school functions. He could budget every penny with precision, but couldn't afford the spontaneous generosity that seemed to come so naturally to families with more resources. Yet he was also the man who had never missed reading Emma 3 bedtime stories, who had taught himself to braid hair and bake bread, and navigate the complex social dynamics of elementary school fundraisers. He was the father who showed up to every school event, even when his work clothes marked him as different from the other parents. Because Emma's face in the crowd was worth any amount of discomfort. Most of all, he was the man who had raised a daughter who ran to him with joy every single day, who trusted him completely, who had never once made him feel like their life was anything less than magical. In Emma's eyes, he wasn't the construction worker who struggled to make ends meet. He was simply Daddy, the most important person in her universe, the keeper of bedtime stories and Saturday morning pancakes, the one who made everything better just by being there. It was this version of himself that Joseph held on to as he stood at the back of the PTA meeting, watching his daughter prepare to share their story with a room full of people who had never had to choose between groceries and gas, who had never felt the weight of raising a child, alone on a paycheck that never seemed to stretch far enough. The first crack in Joseph's carefully constructed world had appeared 3 weeks before the PTA meeting, on a Tuesday morning that started like any other, but ended with Emma walking slowly to his truck instead of running, her usual exuberance replaced by something that looked suspiciously like shame. "How was your day, Princess?" he asked as she climbed into the passenger seat, but her response was muted, lacking the usual detailed recounting of playground adventures and classroom discoveries. "It was okay." "Daddy," she said, fiddling with the strap of her backpack, "Mrs. Peterson talked about the Fall Festival today." The Fall Festival was Oakwood Elementary's biggest fundraiser of the year, a carnival-style event held on the school grounds with games, food booths, and a silent auction that raised money for everything from new playground equipment to classroom supplies. Joseph had volunteered for setup duty the past 2 years, arriving early to help string lights and arrange tables because his labor was valued, even if his wallet couldn't compete with the cash donations. "That sounds fun, sweetheart. Are you excited?" he asked, navigating through the pickup line traffic while keeping one eye on Emma's reflection in the rearview mirror. Emma was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the perfectly manicured lawns of Maple Heights. "Daddy, do we have to do the cake auction this year?" Joseph's stomach dropped. The cake auction was a fall festival tradition where families donated elaborately decorated, homemade cakes that were then auctioned off to raise funds. Last year, Emma had been so proud when they'd spent an entire Saturday creating a 3-layer chocolate cake with purple frosting roses that he'd learned to make from a YouTube tutorial. It wasn't as professional looking as the cakes donated by Mrs. Richmond and her friends, those works of art that looked like they'd come from expensive bakeries, but Emma had been thrilled to see their creation displayed on the auction table. "Why wouldn't we want to do the cake auction, sweetheart?" he asked gently. Though he suspected he knew where this conversation was heading, Emma's voice was small when she answered. "Madison said that only the pretty cakes get good bids, and that some cakes just sit there because nobody wants them. She said her mom spent $200 on cake supplies last year." $200. Joseph made a quick mental calculation. That was nearly a third of his weekly take-home pay, more than he spent on groceries in a month. The cake supplies he'd bought for their contribution had cost him $37, and even that had required careful budgeting and the sacrifice of his usual Friday night pizza with Emma. "Emma, look at me," he said, pulling into their apartment complex parking lot and turning to face his daughter. "Our cake was beautiful last year. You worked so hard on those roses, and you were so proud when people were bidding on it. That's what matters." But even as he said the words, he could see the doubt in Emma's eyes. At 8 years old, she was beginning to notice the differences between their life and the lives of her classmates. The signs had been subtle at first, questions about why they didn't take vacations like other families, or why they shopped at discount stores instead of the mall. But lately, the observations were becoming more frequent and more pointed. The next incident occurred the following week during the parent-teacher conferences. Joseph had arranged to take a half-day off work, something that cost him 4 hours of pay, but was necessary for staying involved in Emma's education. He arrived at the school still in his work clothes, having stopped only to wash his hands and face in the construction site trailer. Mrs. Peterson was a kind woman in her early 50s who had been teaching second grade for over 20 years. She genuinely cared about her students, and Joseph had always felt comfortable talking with her about Emma's progress and needs. "Emma is such a bright, caring little girl," Mrs. Peterson began, consulting her notes as they sat in tiny plastic chairs designed for children. "Her reading comprehension is above grade level, and she's showing real aptitude for creative writing." Joseph felt the familiar swell of pride that came whenever someone praised his daughter. "She loves to read. We go to the library every Saturday morning, and she always comes home with a stack of books. I can tell," Mrs. Peterson smiled. "She often references things she's learned from her reading during our class discussions. She's curious about the world in a way that's wonderful to see." They discussed Emma's academic performance for several more minutes, all positive news that made Joseph's heart sing with parental pride. But then Mrs. Peterson's expression grew more serious, and Joseph felt his shoulders tense. "There is one thing I wanted to discuss with you, Mr. Stewart," she said carefully. "I've noticed that Emma sometimes seems withdrawn during certain activities, group projects where students need to contribute supplies from home, or when we discuss upcoming events that require additional expenses." Joseph's hands tightened in his lap. "Is she not participating?" "Oh, she participates," Mrs. Peterson assured him quickly. "But I can sense her hesitation sometimes. Last week, when I announced that students could bring in science fair supplies to share with classmates who might need them, Emma immediately offered to bring items. But then she seemed to realize that she might not have much to offer, and she became very quiet. The science fair. Joseph had forgotten about the science fair project that was due in 3 weeks. Emma had mentioned it briefly, saying she wanted to do something with plants or maybe volcanoes, but they hadn't discussed the supply requirements yet. Now, sitting in this classroom surrounded by displays funded by the PTA's generous budget, he felt the familiar knot of anxiety forming in his stomach. "I want you to know," Mrs. Peterson continued, "that I have a discretionary fund for students who need assistance with supplies for various projects. It's completely confidential, and Emma would never know the supplies didn't come from home. The offer was made with kindness, but it still felt like a knife to Joseph's chest. His daughter's teacher had noticed that they struggled financially. Despite his careful efforts to shield Emma from the reality of their situation, it was becoming visible to the outside world. "I appreciate that, Mrs. Peterson," he managed to say, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "But Emma and I will figure out the science fair project together." "We always do." Mrs. Peterson nodded, but Joseph could see the concern in her eyes. "Of course. I just wanted you to know that the option is there if you need it." The drive home was quiet, with Joseph lost in thought about his conversation with Emma's teacher. He'd always prided himself on providing everything Emma needed for school, but apparently the gaps were becoming more noticeable. That evening, he spent 2 hours researching science fair projects that could be done with inexpensive materials, finally settling on a plant growth experiment that would require only seeds, soil, and various liquids to test their effects. But the real crisis came the following Monday, when Emma climbed into the truck with tears streaming down her face. "Princess, what's wrong?" Joseph asked, immediately pulling over to the side of the road so he could give her his full attention. Between sobs, the story came out. That day at lunch, Madison Henderson, Dr. Martinez's daughter, whose family lived in the gated community, had been showing off the new designer lunchbox her mother had bought her. It featured some popular cartoon character that Emma recognized from commercials but had never seen because they didn't have the premium cable channels. Madison asked where I got my lunchbox. Emma hiccuped, and when I said it was from the store, she laughed and said it was from the dollar store and that her mom would never buy something so cheap. Joseph's hands gripped the steering wheel as he fought to control his anger. Not at Emma, never at Emma, but at the casual cruelty of children who had no idea how their words could cut. Emma's lunchbox was indeed from the discount store, a plain blue insulated bag that had cost him $8 and had served its purpose perfectly for 2 years. Then Madison said that her mom told her some kids come from families that don't have much money, and that we should feel sorry for them but not get too close because being poor might be catching. The rage that filled Joseph's chest was so intense he had to take several deep breaths before he could speak. He wanted to march into that school and have a conversation with Madison's mother about teaching her daughter basic human decency. He wanted to find Dr. Martinez and explain exactly what it felt like to work 60-hour weeks and still struggle to provide for your child. But most of all, he wanted to protect Emma from a world that judged people's worth by the size of their bank accounts. "Emma, look at me," he said, turning in his seat to face his daughter. "What Madison said was cruel and wrong. Being poor isn't something that's catching, and having less money doesn't make someone less valuable as a person." Emma wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "But Daddy, are we poor?" The question hung in the air between them like a sword. Joseph had always tried to frame their lifestyle in positive terms. They were careful with money. They appreciated what they had. They found joy in simple pleasures. But Emma was getting older, and she was beginning to see their situation with clearer eyes. "We have less money than some families," he said carefully. "But we have everything we need, and most importantly, we have each other. That's worth more than all the fancy lunchboxes in the world." Emma nodded, but Joseph could see that his words hadn't entirely erased the shame she'd felt that day. The seed of self-consciousness had been planted, and he knew it would continue to grow unless something changed. The situation escalated further the next week when Emma came home with a permission slip for the annual class field trip to the Natural History Museum in the city. The cost was $45 per student, plus money for lunch and souvenirs. Joseph stared at the paper while Emma watched his face carefully, already learning to read the micro-expressions that indicated whether something was financially feasible. "Can I go, Daddy?" she asked, though her tone suggested she was already preparing for disappointment. "Of course you can go." "Princess," Joseph said, though he was already mentally rearranging their budget to accommodate the expense. The field trip was educational and important, and he would find a way to make it work, even if it meant eating peanut butter sandwiches for every meal that week. But the real blow came when Emma mentioned, almost casually, that most of the kids' parents were planning to chaperone the field trip. Mrs. Henderson is going, and Madison's dad too, and Carlos's mum said she might come if her schedule at the hospital allows it. Emma played with the corner of the permission slip, not quite meeting his eyes. I told Mrs. Peterson that you probably couldn't come because you have to work. Joseph felt something crack inside his chest. Emma had automatically assumed he couldn't take time off for her field trip, and the worst part was that she was probably right. Taking a full day off would cost him at least $150 in lost wages, money they couldn't afford to lose with rent due at the end of the month. Actually, he heard himself saying, I think I can arrange to come on the field trip with you. Emma's face lit up with such pure joy that Joseph knew he'd made the right decision regardless of the financial cost. Really? You can come with us? Really? He confirmed, already dreading the conversation he'd need to have with his foreman about taking personal time. But the universe seemed determined to test Joseph's resolve. That Thursday, Emma came home with news about the fall festival committees that parents could join to help organize the event. There was the decoration committee, which required purchasing supplies and dedicating multiple weekends to creating elaborate displays. The food committee needed parents who could contribute both ingredients and time to prepare hundreds of servings. The silent auction committee was seeking donations of services or items that would generate significant bids. Emma rattled off the various committees with enthusiasm, clearly hoping that her father would volunteer for something that would make her feel more connected to the school community. Other parents were signing up for multiple committees, treating the fall festival like a social event where they could showcase their creativity and generosity. Which committee do you want to join, Daddy? Emma asked over dinner that night. Joseph looked at his daughter's hopeful face and felt the weight of inadequacy settle on his shoulders like a lead blanket. He could volunteer for setup and cleanup, the manual labor that didn't require financial contributions, but Emma clearly wanted him to be involved in something more visible, more prestigious. I was thinking maybe I could help with setup, he said carefully. You know how I'm good at building things and organizing. Emma's smile faltered slightly. Madison's mom is chairing the decoration committee. She said they're going to make the cafeteria look like an enchanted forest with real trees and lights everywhere. Real trees. Joseph did a quick mental calculation of what that would cost and felt dizzy. The decoration committee's budget probably exceeded his monthly take-home pay. The breaking point came the following week, when Emma's class began discussing their Thanksgiving projects, family trees that would include photos and information about relatives, ancestry, and family traditions. Emma approached the project with her usual enthusiasm, but Joseph could see the wheels turning in her head as she considered how their simple family structure would compare to the elaborate presentations other students would create. Daddy, she said one evening while they worked on the project together, do you think Mrs. Peterson will notice that I only have pictures of you and me? Joseph looked up from where he was helping her arrange photos on the poster board they'd bought from the dollar store. Most of their pictures were printed on his phone's portable printer, a gift from Miguel's family last Christmas, so the quality wasn't as sharp as professional prints. But they captured genuine moments of happiness and love. Emma, our family might be smaller than some, but that doesn't make it any less special, he said. Look at all these pictures of us together. Look how happy we are. Emma studied the photos. Images of them at the park, baking in the kitchen, reading together on the couch, building snowmen in the apartment complex courtyard. In every single picture they were laughing or smiling or clearly enjoying each other's company. I know we're happy, Emma said quietly. But sometimes I wish we had more money so you didn't have to work so hard, and so I could bring the fancy snacks to school parties, and so other kids wouldn't look at me different. Joseph's heart shattered. Despite all his efforts to shield Emma from the reality of their financial struggles, she was internalizing the message that their life was somehow lacking. The innocence he'd tried so hard to preserve was being eroded by the daily reminders that they were different from her classmates. That night, after Emma was asleep, Joseph sat at his kitchen table with a calculator and a stack of bills, trying to figure out how to stretch their resources to cover all the school-related expenses that kept arising. The field trip, the science fair supplies, the fall festival cake ingredients, the Thanksgiving project materials. Each individual cost was manageable, but together they represented a significant strain on their already tight budget. More than the money, though, was the growing realization that Emma was beginning to feel ashamed of their life together. The 8-year-old, who used to run to him with uncomplicated joy, was now measuring their experiences against those of her more affluent classmates and finding them wanting. Joseph had always believed that love and attention could compensate for material shortcomings. But Emma was learning that the world outside their apartment didn't always share that perspective. The final straw came 2 days before the PTA meeting, when Emma received an invitation to Madison Henderson's birthday party. The invitation itself was a work of art, professionally printed on cardstock with embossed lettering, complete with a matching envelope and RSVP card. The party was being held at Splash Zone, the city's most expensive indoor water park, with a private party room and catered lunch included. "Look, Daddy," Emma had exclaimed when she pulled the invitation from her backpack. "Madison invited me to her birthday party. It's going to be at Splash Zone, and there's going to be pizza and cake and swimming and everything." Joseph took the invitation with trembling hands, his eyes immediately finding the line that made his stomach drop. Admission and party package, $35 per child. $35 to watch his daughter swim in a pool for 2 hours and eat pizza that probably wasn't any better than the kind they made together on Friday nights. But it wasn't just the money. It was the realization that Emma was so excited to be included, so grateful to be invited to something that other children took for granted. She had never asked why they didn't throw elaborate birthday parties for her, never complained that her celebrations consisted of homemade cake and presents from the dollar store wrapped in newspaper comics. But now, seeing her face light up at the prospect of this extravagant party, Joseph understood how much she had been quietly wishing for experiences like this. "Can I go, Daddy? Please?" Emma asked, her eyes shining with hope and excitement. Joseph looked at his daughter's face and knew he couldn't disappoint her. "Of course you can go, sweetheart. We'll make sure you have everything you need." That night, after Emma was asleep, Joseph sat at his computer and logged into his bank account. The numbers stared back at him with brutal honesty. After rent, utilities, groceries, and Emma's school lunch account, there was barely enough left over for gas to get to work, let alone $35 for a birthday party. But somehow he would find a way. He always did. The next morning, Joseph called his foreman and asked if there were any weekend jobs available, small renovations or repairs that he could do for extra cash. There was a bathroom remodel in Maple Heights that needed to be finished by Monday, and the contractor was willing to pay time and a half for weekend work. Joseph took the job without hesitation, even though it meant spending Emma's weekend working instead of taking her to the library and the park like they usually did. When he told Emma about the change in plans, he tried to make it sound like an adventure. "I have to work this weekend, Princess. But I thought maybe you could come with me and see the house I'm working on. It's in that neighborhood with the big houses and the pretty gardens." Emma nodded, but Joseph could see the disappointment in her eyes. Their Saturday library trips were sacred, one of the few weekly traditions that belonged entirely to them. Now even that was being sacrificed to the demands of keeping up with her classmates' lifestyles. Saturday morning found Joseph and Emma driving through the gates of Maple Heights in his dusty construction truck, past houses that looked like small palaces with their manicured lawns and 3-car garages. Emma pressed her face to the window, taking in the elaborate Halloween decorations that probably cost more than Joseph's monthly grocery budget. "Do rich people live here, Daddy?" Emma asked as they pulled into the driveway of the house where Joseph would be working. People with more money than us live here, Joseph said carefully. But remember, having money doesn't make someone better or worse than anyone else. It just means they have different opportunities. The homeowner, Mrs. Patricia Whitman, was waiting for them when they arrived. She was a woman in her 50s with perfectly styled blonde hair and the kind of casual clothing that Joseph knew was actually very expensive. A cashmere sweater, designer jeans and shoes that probably cost more than he made in a week. "You must be Joseph," she said, extending a manicured hand. "And this must be your daughter. What a lovely little girl." Emma smiled shyly and moved closer to Joseph's side. Mrs. Whitman's attention was already turning to the bathroom renovation, pointing out details that needed to be addressed and timelines that needed to be met. "I'm having a dinner party Monday evening," she explained, "so it's absolutely crucial that everything is finished by then." "I trust that won't be a problem?" "No problem at all, ma'am," Joseph assured her. Though he was already calculating the hours he'd need to work to meet her deadline, while Joseph worked on removing the old tile and fixtures, Emma sat in the corner of the bathroom with her library books, reading quietly and occasionally asking if she could help. She was good company, never complaining about the noise or the dust, content to be near her father, even in these unusual circumstances, during their lunch break. They sat in the truck eating sandwiches that Joseph had packed, looking out at the neighborhood around them. Emma was unusually quiet, and Joseph could sense that something was bothering her. "What are you thinking about, sweetheart?" he asked. Emma was quiet for a moment, then pointed to the house across the street. "That looks like Madison's house. She said she has a pool in her backyard and a playroom just for her toys." Joseph followed her gaze to the sprawling colonial with its perfectly manicured lawn and circular driveway. A Land Rover was parked under a portico that was larger than his entire apartment. "It's a beautiful house," he said, neutrally. "Do you think Madison's family is happier than us because they have such a big house?" Emma asked. The question hit Joseph like a physical blow. His 8-year-old daughter was already beginning to equate material possessions with happiness, despite all his efforts to teach her otherwise. "Emma, look at me," he said, turning to face her fully. "A house is just a place where you live. What makes a home special isn't how big it is or how much it costs. It's the people inside it and the love they share." Emma nodded, but he could see the doubt in her eyes. "But wouldn't it be nice if we had a big house too? And maybe a pool? And a yard where I could have a swing set?" Joseph's throat tightened. Of course she wanted these things. What 8-year-old wouldn't want a pool and a swing set and a room full of toys? He'd been naive to think that love and attention would be enough to shield her from wanting the material comforts that her classmates took for granted. "It would be nice," he admitted, "but we have something even better than a big house." "What's that?" "We have each other. And we have adventures and stories and traditions that are just ours. We have Saturday morning pancakes and Sunday afternoon bike rides and bedtime stories every single night. Most importantly, we have time together. Some of these families with big houses and fancy cars are so busy working to pay for all their things that they don't have time to really be together." Emma considered this, her small face serious with concentration. "But Daddy, you work all the time too, and now you're working on weekends." The observation stung because it was true. Joseph was working more and more just to keep up with the basic expenses, let alone the extras that seemed increasingly necessary for Emma to fit in with her peer group. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was sacrificing time with Emma to earn money for things that were supposed to make her happier. They finished lunch in thoughtful silence, both lost in their own contemplations about the complicated relationship between money, happiness, and family life. The rest of the weekend passed in a blur of physical labor and growing anxiety. Joseph worked 12-hour days, Saturday and Sunday, pushing himself to meet Mrs. Whitman's impossible deadline, while Emma entertained herself with books and art supplies. By Sunday evening, the bathroom was finished, looking like something from a home improvement magazine, and Joseph had earned enough extra money to cover Madison's birthday party and maybe even a small gift, but the victory felt hollow. He'd spent Emma's weekend working instead of being with her, and he could see that she was beginning to understand the trade-offs that defined their life. Time together was precious, but it was also expensive in terms of lost wages. Experiences cost money they didn't have, but Emma was starting to feel left out without them. Monday morning brought the usual rush of getting ready for school, but Emma seemed subdued. She went through the motions of breakfast and getting dressed, but her usual chatter was replaced by thoughtful silence. "Are you feeling okay, Princess?" Joseph asked as they drove to school. "I'm fine, Daddy," she said, but her voice lacked its usual brightness. "I was just thinking about Madison's party on Saturday. Are you excited?" Emma was quiet for a moment. "I am excited, but I also feel, I don't know, weird about it. Weird how? Like maybe I don't belong there. Like the other kids will notice that I'm different." Joseph pulled into the school parking lot and turned off the engine, giving Emma his full attention. "Different how, sweetheart?" Emma's eyes filled with tears. "Different like my clothes aren't from the right stores, and my shoes aren't the expensive kind, and my lunchbox is plain blue instead of having cartoon characters on it. Different like I don't know what to talk about when they talk about their vacations and their big houses and all the things their parents buy them." Joseph's heart broke. His worst fears were coming true. Emma was beginning to internalize the message that their life wasn't good enough. That she wasn't good enough because they didn't have the material possessions that seemed to matter so much in her social world. "Emma, listen to me very carefully," he said, reaching over to take her small hands in his calloused ones. "You belong anywhere you want to belong. You are smart and kind and funny and creative and beautiful inside and out. Those things have nothing to do with where your clothes come from or what kind of lunchbox you carry, but what if the other kids don't think so?" she whispered. "Then that's their loss," Joseph said firmly. "Anyone who would judge you based on your shoes or your lunchbox isn't worth worrying about. Real friends care about who you are as a person, not what you own." Emma wiped her eyes and nodded, but Joseph could tell his words hadn't entirely convinced her. The damage was already done. The seed of self-doubt had been planted and was beginning to grow. That evening, as they worked together on Emma's homework at the kitchen table, Joseph found himself studying his daughter's face and wondering if he was failing her. He tried so hard to create a loving, stable home environment, but was that enough? Was his love sufficient compensation for all the things he couldn't provide? Emma must have sensed his mood because she looked up from her math worksheet and gave him a smile that was pure sunshine. "Daddy, can I tell you something?"
"Of course, sweetheart."
"You can tell me anything. Even though I sometimes wish we had more money for things, I'm really glad you're my daddy. Some of my friends' daddies are always at work or on their phones, but you always have time to help me with my homework and read me stories and talk to me about stuff." Joseph felt tears sting his eyes. "Thank you for telling me that, Princess. Being your daddy is the best job in the whole world." Emma grinned and went back to her math, leaving Joseph to contemplate the complexity of parenting in a world where love competed with materialism for a child's sense of self-worth. The PTA meeting was scheduled for Tuesday evening, just 3 days away. Joseph had almost forgotten about it entirely, consumed as he was with work and worry about Emma's growing awareness of their financial limitations. But Emma reminded him at breakfast Tuesday morning, her excitement palpable. "Don't forget about the PTA meeting tonight, Daddy. Mrs. Peterson said kids can share something about their families if they want to." Joseph's stomach clenched. "Are you thinking about sharing something, sweetheart?" Emma nodded enthusiastically. "I wrote a speech about you. Want to hear it?" Before Joseph could respond, Emma was already pulling a piece of notebook paper from her backpack. The margins were decorated with hearts and stars drawn in purple ink, and her careful cursive handwriting filled the page. "My daddy is the best," she began, reading from her paper with the serious concentration of someone delivering a presidential address. Joseph listened with growing alarm as Emma began to share details about their life that he'd tried so hard to keep private. She talked about how he read her 3 stories every night, how he made pancakes shaped like animals on Saturday mornings, how he taught himself to braid her hair from YouTube videos. She mentioned their library, trips and their walks in the park, and the way he always made time to help with her homework, no matter how tired he was from work. But she also mentioned things that revealed their financial situation, how they shopped at discount stores and used coupons, how they made their own entertainment instead of going to expensive places, how he worked weekends sometimes to earn extra money. To Emma, these were simply facts about their life together, but Joseph knew that to the other parents they would be markers of their economic status. "What do you think, Daddy?" Emma asked when she finished reading. "Is it good?" Joseph looked at his daughter's eager face and realized he was at a crossroads. He could ask her to revise the speech, to remove the details that might embarrass him or mark them as different from the other families. Or he could trust that their story, their real story, was worth telling exactly as it was. "It's perfect, sweetheart," he said, meaning it completely. "I'm proud of you for wanting to share our story." And he was proud, even as his stomach churned with anxiety about how the other parents would react. Emma's speech was honest and heartfelt, full of love and gratitude for their life together. If the other parents judged them for that, then perhaps their judgment said more about them than it did about the Stewart family. Now, standing at the back of the cafeteria watching Emma approach the podium, Joseph felt all those weeks of mounting pressure and worry converge into this single moment. His daughter was about to share their truth with a room full of people who had never had to choose between rent and groceries, who had never felt the weight of raising a child on a budget that never seemed to stretch far enough. But as Emma adjusted the microphone and found his eyes in the crowd, Joseph felt something shift inside him. This was his daughter, brave, honest, and full of love. Whatever happened next, he would face it with pride in the remarkable little girl he'd raised and the life they'd built together. Emma cleared her throat again, a small sound that seemed to echo in the sudden stillness of the room. The fluorescent lights continued their incessant buzzing overhead, but every other sound had faded away as if the world itself was holding its breath. "Hi, everyone," she repeated, her voice growing stronger with each word. "My name is Emma Stewart, and I want to tell you about my daddy." She unfolded her paper with deliberate care, smoothing the wrinkles against the podium. Joseph could see her small fingers trembling slightly, but her voice remained steady and clear. "My daddy is the best daddy in the whole world, and I want to tell you why." Mrs. Richmond shifted in her front row seat, her expression politely attentive but clearly expecting a brief, generic tribute that would allow the meeting to move on to more important matters. Behind her, other parents sat with varying degrees of interest, some checking their phones, others glancing at their watches. "Every morning," Emma continued, reading from her purple-inked paper, "my daddy wakes up really early to make me breakfast. Not just cereal or Pop-Tarts like some kids get, but real breakfast with eggs and toast that he makes from bread he baked himself. And he always puts my coffee in the cat mug he bought me for Christmas, even though it's really just milk with a little bit of coffee to make me feel grown up." A few parents smiled at this, recognizing the universal parental experience of indulging a child's desire to feel mature. Joseph felt some of the tension in his shoulders ease slightly. "While I eat breakfast, my daddy braids my hair. It took him a long time to learn how to do braids, because daddies don't usually know how to do hair stuff. But he watched YouTube videos every night after I went to sleep, and he practiced on my dolls until he got really good at it. Now he can do regular braids and French braids, and even the fancy kind with ribbons woven through them." The room was becoming more attentive now. Several mothers had stopped checking their phones and were looking at Emma with genuine interest. Joseph caught sight of Dr. Martinez leaning forward slightly, her professional composure softened by what might have been surprise or respect. "My daddy works really hard at his job building things. His hands have lots of cuts and calluses because construction work is tough, but he never complains about it. When he comes home, even if he's really tired, He always asks about my day and listens to every single thing I tell him about school and my friends and what we learned. Emma paused to look up from her paper, scanning the faces in the audience until she found her father at the back of the room. The smile she gave him was radiant, full of uncomplicated love and pride. Then we do my homework together at our kitchen table. Sometimes the math is hard for both of us, but my daddy never gives up. If he doesn't know how to do something, he looks it up on his computer or finds videos to help us learn together. He says that learning new things is one of the best parts of being alive. Mrs. Henderson, seated in the second row, had stopped looking at her watch. Her expression was thoughtful, perhaps remembering her own struggles to help her children with increasingly complex assignments. After homework, we make dinner together. My daddy is a really good cook, even though we don't have fancy ingredients like some families. He can make anything taste delicious, and he always lights our special candle in the middle of the table to make dinner feel like a party. We talk about our days while we eat, and he tells me about the buildings he's working on and the funny things his friend Miguel says. Emma's voice was growing more confident with each sentence, her initial nervousness replaced by genuine enthusiasm for her subject. She wasn't just reciting a speech anymore. She was sharing her truth with the authentic passion of someone who truly believed in what she was saying. The best part of every day is bedtime, because my daddy reads me 3 stories every single night. Not 1 story, not 2 stories, but always 3. Sometimes they're books from the library, and sometimes they're stories he makes up about a little girl who can talk to animals or fly to the moon. He does different voices for all the characters, and he never gets tired of reading the same book over and over if it's my favorite. The room had grown completely still now. Even the parents who had seemed distracted or impatient were listening with full attention. There was something compelling about Emma's earnest recital of these simple daily rituals, the way she described each act of care as if it were extraordinary. My daddy built my bed with his own hands. It's painted white with purple accents because those are my favorite colors. He also painted my room yellow because he said it would be like sunshine to wake up to every morning. When I was scared of monsters in my closet, he installed a special light that I could turn on by myself, and he checked the closet every night for a whole month until I felt brave again. Joseph felt his throat tighten. He remembered those nights when Emma had been convinced that monsters lived in her closet, how he'd patiently investigated every corner and shadow until she felt safe. It had seemed like such a small thing at the time, just part of being a parent. But hearing Emma describe it now made him realize how much those gestures of protection and comfort had meant to her. On Saturdays, we go to the library together, and I get to pick out as many books as I want. My daddy says that books are treasures that don't cost anything once you have a library card. After the library, we go to the park and have picnics with sandwiches and fruit, and sometimes my daddy pushes me on the swings so high I feel like I'm flying. Emma's enthusiasm was infectious. Several parents were smiling now, perhaps remembering their own children's joy on swings and slides, the simple pleasure of a shared picnic in the park. On Sundays, we make pancakes shaped like animals. My daddy is really good at making pancake elephants and butterflies and cats. We listen to music on his old radio and dance around the kitchen while we cook. He taught me that cooking together is just as important as eating together, because it's time when we can talk and laugh and be silly. The image of Joseph and Emma dancing around their modest kitchen, Flour dusting their clothes as they shaped pancake batter into whimsical animals, was so vivid and joyful that it seemed to transform the sterile atmosphere of the school cafeteria. For a moment, the room felt warmer, more human. When I'm sick, my daddy takes care of me, even if it means he has to miss work. He makes me chicken soup from scratch and reads to me, and puts cool washcloths on my forehead. He never acts like taking care of me is a chore or something he has to do. He acts like it's exactly where he wants to be. Joseph remembered the last time Emma had been sick with the flu, how he'd spent 2 days holding her while she slept fitfully, taking her temperature and coaxing her to drink fluids. Missing work had meant a smaller paycheck that week, but he'd never hesitated. Emma's health and comfort had been the only things that mattered. My daddy teaches me important things, not just about homework, but about life. He taught me that it's okay to make mistakes as long as you learn from them. He taught me to be kind to people even when they're not kind to you. He taught me that having less money than other people doesn't make you less important as a person. A subtle shift occurred in the room at these words. Parents who had been simply listening to a charming recital of father-daughter activities suddenly realized that Emma was addressing something deeper, something that touched on the social dynamics they all navigated but rarely discussed openly. Some kids at school have parents who buy them lots of expensive things, and sometimes I used to feel sad that we couldn't afford those things too. But my daddy helped me understand that the best gifts aren't things you can buy in a store. The best gifts are time and attention and love, and making someone feel special just because of who they are. Mrs. Richmond's expression had changed noticeably. The polite mask of attention had been replaced by something more genuine, a recognition that this 8-year-old was speaking about values that perhaps she'd forgotten in the rush of material accumulation and social competition. My daddy works really hard, sometimes even on weekends, to make sure we have everything we need. Our apartment isn't as big as some houses, and our car is old, and sometimes we have to be careful about money. But our home is full of love and laughter and music and stories. I never go to bed wondering if my daddy loves me, because he shows me every single day in a million different ways. Emma paused to wipe her eyes, which had begun to tear up as she spoke about her father's love. The room was absolutely silent now, with parents leaning forward in their chairs, completely absorbed in her words. Last week, Madison asked me if we were poor, and it made me feel ashamed for a minute. But then I thought about it, and I realized that we're not poor at all. We're rich in all the ways that really matter. We're rich in love and time together and adventures and traditions that are just ours. Joseph saw several parents glance toward Madison Henderson's mother, but Mrs. Henderson's attention was focused entirely on Emma. Her expression troubled as she perhaps recognized her own daughter's words reflected back to her. My daddy always says that what makes a family special isn't how much money they have or how big their house is. It's how much they care about each other and how they treat people, and whether they're grateful for what they have, instead of always wanting more. Emma looked up from her paper again, scanning the room with the serious expression of someone delivering an important message. I know some of you probably feel sorry for us because we don't have as much money as other families. But you don't need to feel sorry for us. We have everything we need and more. We have each other, and we have love, and we have the most important thing in the world. We have time together. Her voice grew stronger and more confident with each word. My daddy never misses my school plays, even if it means he loses money from work. He never forgets to pack my lunch with a note telling me to have a good day. He never makes me feel like I'm bothering him when I want to talk or when I need help with something. He makes me feel like I'm the most important person in his whole world. Because I am. Joseph felt tears running down his face now, not from sadness but from overwhelming pride and love for his remarkable daughter. She had taken their simple life and transformed it into something beautiful and meaningful through the power of her words and her perspective. When other kids talk about the expensive things their parents buy them, I want to tell them about the things my daddy gives me that you can't buy in any store. He gives me confidence and kindness and curiosity about the world. He gives me the feeling of being completely safe and loved. He gives me the knowledge that no matter what happens, there's someone who will always be on my side. The room was so quiet that the hum of the air conditioning seemed loud by comparison. Parents sat transfixed, some dabbing at their eyes with tissues, others staring at Emma with expressions of amazement and recognition. My daddy isn't perfect. Nobody is. Sometimes he's tired after work, And sometimes he worries about money, and sometimes he doesn't know how to help me with my math homework. But he's perfect for me. He's exactly the daddy I need, and I'm the luckiest girl in the world to be his daughter." Emma folded her paper carefully and looked directly at Joseph, her face glowing with love and pride. "My daddy taught me that the richest people in the world aren't the ones with the most money. They're the ones with the most love. And by that measure, we're millionaires." She paused, then added with a smile that lit up the entire room, "So that's why my daddy is the best daddy in the whole world. Not because of what he buys me, but because of who he is and how he loves me." "Thank you." Emma stepped back from the podium, clutching her speech to her chest, and the room erupted. Not in polite, obligatory applause, but in genuine, heartfelt clapping that seemed to go on and on. Parents were standing now, some wiping their eyes, others nodding in recognition and respect. Joseph stood frozen at the back of the room, overwhelmed by the power of his daughter's words and the reaction they had generated. Emma had taken their story, their real story, with all its financial struggles and simple pleasures, and transformed it into something universal and profound. Mrs. Richmond was clapping with tears streaming down her face. Dr. Martinez was on her feet, applauding with the enthusiasm of someone who had just witnessed something extraordinary. Even Mrs. Henderson was clapping, though her expression was thoughtful and perhaps a bit ashamed as she undoubtedly reflected on her daughter's earlier comments about poverty being catching. Emma walked down from the podium and straight to her father, who swept her up in his arms and held her tight, not caring that his work boots and dusty clothes marked him as different from everyone else in the room. In that moment, he was exactly who Emma had described, a man rich in all the ways that truly mattered. "I'm so proud of you, Princess," he whispered in her ear as the applause continued around them. "Did I do okay, Daddy?" she asked, though the answer was written on every face in the room. "You did perfect, sweetheart. Absolutely perfect." The applause continued for what felt like an eternity, washing over Joseph and Emma like a warm wave of acceptance and recognition. As the clapping finally began to subside, Joseph became aware that people were standing, not just politely acknowledging the end of Emma's speech, but giving her a genuine standing ovation that seemed to acknowledge something profound had just occurred. Mrs. Peterson, Emma's teacher, was among the first to approach them. Her eyes were bright with tears, and her smile was radiant as she reached out to touch Emma's shoulder. "Emma, that was absolutely beautiful," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I've been teaching for over 20 years, and I've never heard anything quite like that. You should be very proud." Emma beamed, still safe in her father's arms. "Thank you, Mrs. Peterson. I just wanted everyone to know how great my daddy is." "Well, I think you accomplished that and so much more," Mrs. Peterson replied, then turned to Joseph. "Mr. Stewart, you should know that you have an extraordinary daughter. But more than that, it's clear that she's extraordinary because of the love and guidance you've given her." Joseph felt his throat tighten. "Thank you," he managed to say. "She's the best thing in my life." Before Mrs. Peterson could respond, other parents began to approach. Joseph braced himself, unsure what to expect from people who, just minutes before, had seemed so different from him, so removed from his struggles and circumstances. The first was Dr. Martinez, whose son Carlos was in Emma's class. Joseph had always felt intimidated by her professional success and obvious wealth, but now she approached with genuine warmth and what looked like respect in her eyes. "Mr. Stewart," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Angela Martinez, Carlos's mother. I just wanted to say how moved I was by Emma's speech. She's remarkable, and it's clear where she gets her wisdom and values." Joseph shook her hand, surprised by the firmness of her grip and the sincerity in her eyes. "Thank you, Dr. Martinez. Emma thinks very highly of Carlos. She says he's one of the kindest kids in her class." "That means a lot to me," Dr. Martinez replied. "You know, listening to Emma tonight made me realize that my husband and I have been so focused on providing Carlos with material advantages that we might be missing some of the simple, important things you and Emma share. Would you mind if I asked you about some of your family traditions?" The pancake breakfasts and library visits sound wonderful. Joseph blinked in surprise. One of the most successful, accomplished parents in the school was asking him for parenting advice based on the life he'd been so worried about being judged for. "I'd be happy to share anything that might be helpful," he said. Still processing this unexpected reversal, more parents were gathering around them now, and Joseph began to recognize faces he'd seen but never really talked to. There was Mr. Chen, whose daughter Linda was in Emma's reading group, and Mrs. Foster, whose twin boys played soccer with Emma at recess. Each of them had something kind to say about Emma's speech, and by extension, about the parenting that had produced such a thoughtful, articulate, grateful child. "I have to admit," Mrs. Foster said, "listening to Emma talk about your bedtime routine made me realize that I've been rushing through story time with my boys because I'm always thinking about all the other things I need to get done." 3 stories every night? "That's dedication." "It's not dedication," Joseph replied honestly. "It's the best part of my day. Those 30 minutes when Emma and I are reading together are when I feel most like I'm doing something right as a parent." Mrs. Foster nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe I need to rethink my priorities. My boys are always asking for just one more story, and I usually say no because I want to get the dishes done or catch up on emails. But dishes and emails will always be there. My boys won't be little forever." Joseph was beginning to understand that Emma's speech had done something he'd never expected. It had given other parents permission to question their own assumptions about success and priorities. By sharing their simple but love-filled life, Emma had reminded everyone in the room of what truly mattered. The conversation was interrupted by the approach of Mrs. Richmond, the PTA president, whose perfectly coordinated outfits and casual mentions of expensive purchases had always made Joseph feel inadequate. He tensed slightly, unsure what to expect from someone who seemed to embody everything he couldn't provide for Emma. But Mrs. Richmond's expression was soft, almost vulnerable as she approached. Her usual mask of polished perfection had been replaced by something more human and relatable. "Mr. Stewart," she began, her voice lacking its usual authoritative tone. "I owe you an apology." Joseph frowned, confused. "An apology for what?" "For assuming things about you and Emma based on, well, on things that don't matter. I've been on this PTA for 5 years, and I've gotten so caught up in fundraising numbers and budget meetings and making sure everything looks perfect that I've forgotten what we're actually here for, the children." She paused, seeming to gather her thoughts. Emma's speech reminded me of something I'd lost sight of. My own daughter, Sophie, is in 4th grade, and lately, when I ask her about her day, she gives me one-word answers. But when Emma talks about your conversations at dinner, about how you really listen to her and engage with her stories, it made me realize that I've been so busy managing Sophie's life that I haven't been truly present in it. Joseph didn't know what to say. The woman he'd been intimidated by for 3 years was revealing her own insecurities and shortcomings, triggered by his daughter's honest account of their daily life. "Mrs. Richmond," he said carefully, "I think all parents struggle with finding balance. You do so much for this school, for all our children. That matters too, does it though?" she asked, her voice small. "Or have I been using all this busy work to avoid dealing with the fact that my marriage is falling apart and my daughter barely talks to me anymore? You work construction all day, which has to be exhausting, but you still have the energy to read Emma 3 stories every night and help with her homework and really engage with her life. I can't remember the last time I read Sophie a bedtime story." Joseph felt a wave of compassion for this woman he'd misunderstood so completely. Behind her perfect exterior was a parent struggling with the same fundamental challenges he faced, just from a different direction. "It's never too late to start," he said gently. "Kids are remarkably forgiving. If you started reading to Sophie tonight, she might be surprised, but I bet she'd love it." Mrs. Richmond nodded, tears threatening to spill over. "Thank you for saying that. And thank you for raising such an incredible daughter. She's given us all a gift tonight, As Mrs. Richmond walked away, wiping her eyes discreetly, Joseph found himself surrounded by more parents wanting to share their thoughts about Emma's speech. The evening that had begun with his stomach churning with anxiety had transformed into something he'd never expected. A celebration of the values he'd tried so hard to instill in his daughter. Emma tugged on his sleeve. "Daddy, can we go home now? I'm getting sleepy." Joseph looked down at his daughter, who had somehow managed to touch the hearts of dozens of adults with her simple truth-telling. "Of course, Princess. Let's head home." As they walked toward the exit, Mrs. Peterson approached one final time. "Mr. Stewart, I hope you know what a special evening this was." Emma's speech reminded all of us why we're really here, for the children and the love that shapes them. The drive home was quiet, with Emma's head resting against the window as she processed the evening's events. Finally, she spoke up. "Daddy, why were so many grown-ups crying during my speech?" Joseph considered his answer carefully. "Sometimes, sweetheart, when people hear the truth told with love, it touches something deep inside them. Your speech reminded them of what's really important in life." Emma smiled sleepily. "I'm glad I told everyone about us, Daddy. I'm proud of our life together." Joseph felt his heart swell with a contentment he'd never experienced before. "Me too, Princess. Me too." That night, as he tucked Emma into the bed he'd built with his own hands, Joseph realized that his daughter had given him the greatest gift of all, the recognition that their simple life, built on love and presence and daily acts of care, was not just enough. It was extraordinary. "Sweet dreams, beautiful girl," he whispered, kissing her forehead. "Daddy loves you more than all the stars in the sky." "I love you too, Daddy," Emma murmured, already half asleep. "We're the richest family in the world." As Joseph turned off the light and closed Emma's bedroom door, he knew she was absolutely right. Thank you for joining us on Joseph and Emma's heartwarming journey. If you enjoyed this story about the true meaning of family wealth, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and ring the bell for notifications of our latest stories.